When you stop fixing, you don't just pause a conversation, you dismantle the emotional safety they've been relying on without admitting it. Because for a long time, your heart has been doing the invisible work of keeping the connection stable. You were the one who reached after they pulled away. You were the one who softened the sharp edges of their distance. You were the one who turned silence into peace by offering understanding they didn't always earn. And you did it because you loved them, because you hoped, because you believed that if you could keep the relationship calm enough, they would eventually learn how to stay. But your fixing was also a form of protection for them. It protected them from feeling the full weight of their own pattern. It protected them from accountability landing too hard. It protected them from the fear that their withdrawal might actually have consequences. Your love became a cushion. Your patience became a guarantee. And somewhere in the background, even if they never said it out loud, the dynamic started to feel predictable. They could retreat and assume you would repair. They could go cold and assume you would bring warmth back. They could avoid the hard conversation and assume you would eventually carry it alone. Then you stopped. And in that moment, something shifts inside them that no argument ever managed to create. Because when you stop fixing, their distance is no longer softened by your devotion. Their silence is no longer translated by your empathy. Their withdrawal is no longer rescued by your hope. The emotional responsibility they were used to handing you is now sitting right in their own lap. And that can be uncomfortable in a way they are not used to feeling. At first, they might not call it pain. They may feel a brief sense of relief. The pressure seems lower. The emotional intensity seems gone. The relationship feels quieter. But relief is a short-term emotion when it is built on avoidance. Because what they don't realize immediately is that the quiet you're offering now is not the quiet of waiting. It's the quiet of waking up. It's the quiet of someone who has finally decided, I will not carry this alone anymore. When your fixing disappears, the illusion of control begins to crack. They were used to the rhythm being predictable. Pull away, then watch you repair. That rhythm allowed them to keep one foot in safety and one foot in escape. But your non-repair changes the rules. Now they can't be certain that distance will be met with pursuit. They can't assume that your heart will keep doing overtime to make love feel stable. They are forced to face the unsettling possibility that you might actually mean what your calm is saying. And that is where the weight arrives. Not always as dramatic panic, often as a quiet internal tension, a restlessness they can't fully name, a strange awareness when they check their phone and your emotional rescue isn't there, a subtle discomfort when they realize that what once felt normal now feels like loss. Because your fixing wasn't just effort, it was the emotional engine. And when the engine stops, the silence is no longer soothing, it's revealing. They begin to feel the space you used to fill, the space where reassurance lived, the space where clarity used to be built by your words, the space where your patience made their avoidance feel safe. And for the first time, they are left with a more honest version of the connection, one that doesn't run on your self-sacrifice, one that doesn't survive on your emotional labor, one that doesn't stay alive just because you refuse to let it die. Your calm becomes the loudest message, because calm is what they can't argue with. They can dismiss your emotions when you're explaining. They can label you intense when you're pleading. They can minimize your pain when you're trying to be understood, but you're calm. Your refusal to fix, that locks them into a mirror they can't easily escape. The mirror shows them that your love was not endless, that your energy was not automatic, that their distance was not harmless. And here's what you need to remember while this is happening. Their discomfort is not your responsibility, because it is so easy in this moment to feel pulled back into the role you mastered, the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who saves the connection from collapsing. You may feel the urge to check in again, to make things smoother, to prove you still care. But that urge is the old you, trained by a pattern that only worked when you were willing to do double the emotional work. This new you doesn't need to prove love by self-abandonment. This new you understands that love should not require you to rescue someone from the consequences of their own inconsistency. This new you understands that your heart is not a safety net for someone who keeps choosing distance. This new you understands that if a relationship can only survive when you are exhausted, it was never balanced in the first place. When you stop fixing, you give reality room to speak. You stop covering the cracks. You stop holding the structure up alone. You stop translating their silence into excuses. You let the pattern be seen for what it is. And if they are capable of growth, this is where it will begin. Not in dramatic words, but in steady action. In accountability that doesn't need to be demanded. In presence that doesn't only show up when you're halfway gone. In consistency that exists on normal days, not just crisis days. And if they are not capable of growth, then your decision is still sacred. Because the real heartbreak was never just their pull away. The real heartbreak was how often you pulled away from yourself to keep them comfortable. So this keynote is not about making them feel your absence like punishment. It's about making your peace your priority. It's about finally choosing a love that doesn't require you to be the only one who fights for stability. It's about your refusal to keep paying for a relationship with your dignity. When you stop fixing, you don't lose your power. You return to it. When you stop fixing things after they pull away, the first emotion that can rise inside an avoidant is relief. And I know how unfair that can feel to hear. Because you were the one carrying the weight. You were the one trying to turn distance into understanding. You were the one who kept the connection alive with your patience, your empathy, your late-night overthinking, your soft words that tried to protect a love that kept slipping away. So when you finally step back and they feel relief, it can sting like a quiet betrayal. But that relief isn't always about you being unimportant. It's often about their nervous system being wired to interpret emotional responsibility as pressure. Relief is the body's exhale when conflict disappears. Relief is what happens when no one is asking them to be present in a way they don't yet know how to sustain. Relief is the temporary calm that shows up when accountability is no longer knocking on the door. They might tell themselves they needed space. They might feel lighter for a moment. They might even look calm and composed on the outside. But what you need to understand is that relief in this context is often the beginning of a deeper emotional reckoning, not the end of the story, because you're not fixing is different from your old silence. This is not the quiet that comes before you soften again. This is not the pause before you send the message that repairs everything. This is not you swallowing your hurt just to keep the peace. This is a new kind of quiet that carries a new meaning. It says, I am not responsible for holding this alone anymore. It says, if you choose distance, you will finally feel what distance costs. And once that truth begins to settle into the space you've created, relief can't remain comfortable for long. That's when uncertainty begins to rise. Uncertainty is the feeling of losing the script that used to keep them safe. Because the pattern was predictable before. They pulled away, and you reached. They went cold and you warmed the room back up. They disappeared emotionally, and you tried to build a bridge with your words. Your fixing became the safety net under their avoidance. Even if they never said it out loud, part of them relied on your consistency to make their inconsistency survivable. You were the emotional gravity that kept the relationship from floating into complete disconnection. So when you stop fixing, uncertainty enters like a quiet storm. They start wondering why you're not there the way you used to be. They start noticing that your energy has changed. They start feeling how unfamiliar it is to not have your emotional labor waiting in the background. And the confusion can be deeply unsettling because uncertainty forces them to face a truth they didn't want to face when you were still trying. It forces them to consider that your love was not automatic, that your patience was not endless, that your heart was not an infinite emergency service for a relationship that refused to stabilize. They can no longer assume you will rescue the connection from the consequences of their withdrawal. They can no longer assume the distance will be softened by your devotion. And that is where the quiet fear begins. Not always loud, not always dramatic, often invisible everyone except the person who is living inside it. The quiet fear is the moment they realize they might not be in control of the distance anymore. For an avoidant, control of closeness is a form of emotional safety. They regulate their nervous system by deciding when love gets close and when it gets far. They withdraw when they feel overwhelmed. They return when they feel calm. And that pattern can survive for a long time when the other person keeps repairing the connection after every retreat. But your refusal to fix breaks that system. Now the distance is not theirs to manage. Now the timing is not theirs to dictate. Now your silence isn't a stage of the cycle, it's a boundary. And boundaries expose truth. So the quiet fear grows into questions they can't ignore. Are they really done? Did I finally push too far? Why are they not chasing? Why does this feel different? This fear isn't always about love in the purest sense. Sometimes it's fear of consequence. Fear of losing access to the comfort you provided. Fear of losing the emotional safety you represented, even when they didn't know how to treat it as sacred. Because your fixing wasn't just effort. It was a structure. It was a buffer. It was the thing that made them feel they could retreat without truly risking the relationship collapsing. And now that buffer is gone. So they may test you, not always with deep vulnerability, sometimes with small, safe contact, a short message, a casual check-in, a polite hope you're okay. These are often emotional feelers, not full emotional ownership. A way to check if the old version of you is still available. A way to see if your boundaries are real or temporary. A way to find out if a little discomfort on their end is enough to trigger you to return to your fixing role. And this is where your growth becomes the most important part of the entire story. Because the real power here is not that they feel relief, uncertainty, or fear. The real power is that you finally stopped sacrificing yourself to keep them comfortable. You are not here to be someone's emotional rescue plan. You are not here to rebuild closeness every time they break it. You are not here to prove your love by tolerating inconsistency. Your silence is not punishment. Your silence is protection. And if their fear is truly the beginning of growth, you will see it in consistency that lasts beyond the moment. You will see it in accountability that doesn't need to be chased. You will see it in presence that shows up on ordinary days, not just in the panic of potential loss. Because real change doesn't only emerge when the door is closing. Real change emerges because someone finally chooses to become safe, not just because they are afraid to be alone. So let them feel what they feel. Relief, uncertainty, quiet fear. And let you feel what matters most, your peace returning, your dignity strengthening, your heart no longer running towards someone who keeps calling distance normal, while you quietly pay the price for it. When you stop fixing things and you stay calm after they pull away, your calm becomes a truth they can't argue with. Because arguments give them something to deflect. Your tears give them something to label. Your explanations give them something to twist into pressure. But your calm is different. Your calm is the quiet ending of a story where you used to carry the emotional weight alone. Your calm is not coldness. It is clarity. It is the sound of you finally refusing to bleed quietly, just to keep love alive. For so long, you may have been trained to believe that if you just said it better, softer, kinder, they would finally understand. You tried to find the perfect words that would make them feel safe enough to stay present. You explained your needs in gentle ways. You repeated yourself with patience. You reduced your feelings into small, manageable pieces so you wouldn't trigger their shutdown. But the truth is, you weren't failing at communication. You were trying to build intimacy with someone who was still using distance to feel powerful. So when you become calm, you remove their favorite escape route. Because they can't blame your reaction anymore. They can't call you dramatic anymore. They can't say you're too emotional anymore. Your calm removes the smoke screen. It shows the pattern in full light. It reveals what your pain was always trying to explain. That love was not the problem. Effort was not the problem. Your heart was not the problem. The problem was that you were the only one consistently showing up for the relationship's emotional survival. The problem was that your desire for closeness kept being treated like a threat instead of a normal human need. This is why calm after the pull away is so powerful. Because calm says, I'm no longer negotiating my worth. Calm says, I'm no longer chasing someone who keeps running. Calm says, I'm no longer doing the emotional labor for two hearts. And they feel that, even if they don't admit it, even if they pretend they're fine. Because your calm is not passive, it's disruptive. It disrupts the old dynamic where distance was rewarded and your patience was assumed. It disrupts the rhythm where they could withdraw and trust that you would return with warmth, repair, and forgiveness. It disrupts the comfort they found in your predictability. Your calm makes you unpredictable in the best way. And for someone who relies on control of closeness, unpredictability is unsettling. Because now they don't know if you'll chase. They don't know if you'll explain. They don't know if you'll fix what you didn't break alone. And that uncertainty forces the pattern to stand on its own. No filters, no rescue, no emotional safety net provided by your overgiving. So your calm becomes a mirror. And this mirror is brutal in its honesty. It shows them that the relationship didn't heal because you lacked love. It shows them that the connection didn't stabilize because you lacked patience. It shows them that the real fracture was consistency. It shows them that you were not asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to show up in the right way. And here's the part that matters even more. Your calm is also a mirror for you. Because you start seeing your own pattern too. You start seeing how often you apologized for having feelings. How often you softened your boundaries to keep them comfortable. How often you accepted confusion. Because consistency felt like a dream you didn't deserve to demand. How often you tried to earn the bare minimum with maximum effort. And when you realize that your calm becomes a form of self-respect, it becomes you saying, I'm done auditioning for a role I already earned with my loyalty. It becomes you saying, I won't keep proving my value to someone who keeps treating love like optional effort. It becomes you saying, I will not chase clarity from someone who benefits from my confusion. This is the moment your strength stops being silent suffering and becomes visible self-protection. And yes, that can make them uncomfortable. Because your calm is not a threat, it is a consequence. It is the consequence of you finally choosing not to carry the relationship alone. They may feel the shift and test it. A small message, a casual check-in, a light attempt to re-enter your emotional space. Because they want to see if your calm is permanent or temporary. They want to see if this version of you is real. They want to see if they can still access the old dynamic with minimal effort. But your calm teaches a new truth. That access to you is no longer based on history alone. It's based on consistency. It's based on safety. It's based on mutual effort. And this is how you know you're healing. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. You stopped making their comfort more important than your peace. You stopped treating their withdrawal like a puzzle you must solve. You stopped confusing your emotional labor with the definition of love. You started honoring your own nervous system. You started noticing how love is supposed to feel. Calm, stable, mutual, safe. Your calm is the new standard you've been afraid to demand. And this is why arguments can't compare to it. Arguments can be dismissed. Arguments can be blamed on timing. Arguments can be labeled as drama. But calm can't be denied. Calm is the quiet evidence that you finally see the truth. That love should not feel like a constant repair job. That intimacy should not require you to shrink. That a healthy partner doesn't only show up when you're halfway gone. So if you're in this season right now, if you're holding your calm while your heart is still tender, let yourself be proud of that. Because your calm is not emptiness. It is growth. It is dignity returning to your voice. It is your future calling you forward. And the most emotional part of this story is not what your calm exposes in them. It's what your calm rebuilds in you. When an avoidant pulls away and you stop fixing things, one of the first ways they respond is not with deep accountability, not with a full emotional breakthrough, but with small signals, tiny reach outs, low risk gestures, a short message, a meme, a casual, hope you're good, something that looks harmless, even sweet, but often carries a quiet purpose underneath it. They are testing your availability. They are checking whether your boundaries are real. They are searching for evidence that the old version of you, the fixer, the rescuer, the emotional lifeline, is still within reach. This is not always manipulation in the cruel, calculated sense. Sometimes it's confusion. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's the only emotional language they know how to speak without feeling exposed. Because a dismissive avoidant can struggle with full vulnerability. The deeper the conversation gets, the more threatened their nervous system can feel. So they approach sideways. They knock softly instead of opening up fully. They keep it light because light feels safe. They offer small contact because big accountability feels like emotional danger. But you need to understand the emotional history behind this moment. For a long time, your presence did more than love them. It protected them. Your patience insulated the consequences of their distance. Your understanding softened the discomfort of their inconsistency. Your willingness to fix what you didn't break created a quiet guarantee that they could pull away without truly risking the connection collapsing. So when you stop fixing, they don't just lose your effort. They lose a system they unconsciously relied on. That loss creates unease. And in that unease, these small signals often appear. They send a message that doesn't address the real issue. They check in without naming the pattern. They make contact without making change. Because what they want to know is not always, how do I show up better? Sometimes what they want to know is, do I still have access? Access to your warmth, access to your patience, access to the emotional safety you used to provide even when they didn't reciprocate it. This is why these tiny messages can be so emotionally dangerous for you, because they activate hope, and hope, when it's not anchored in evidence, can pull you back into the same cycle with fresh excitement and the same old pain. Your heart might read the message as a turning point. You might feel that familiar rush, that tender instinct to respond quickly, kindly, openly, like your love is still responsible for keeping the relationship alive. You might want to say, I'm not angry. I just want us to be okay. But this is the exact crossroads where your healing must become stronger than your history. Because a small signal is not a new pattern. A breadcrumb is not a meal. A check-in is not accountability. A hey is not proof of readiness. And sometimes, these small signals are less about love and more about soothing their discomfort with your independence. They're trying to reduce their anxiety without stepping fully into the emotional responsibility they avoided. They want to confirm that the bridge they walked away from is still standing and that you will still be the one who rebuilds it if they don't. You used to be the person who held the emotional structure up with your own hands. So now they are testing whether you put it down for real. This is where you stop confusing your kindness with access. You can be compassionate and still be careful. You can be tender and still be wise. You can acknowledge that they might be struggling and still refuse to be pulled back into a dynamic that required your self-abandonment to function. Because your growth is not measured by whether you can ignore your feelings. Your growth is measured by whether you can honor them without collapsing into rescue mode. If they are reaching out in a truly changed way, you will see it in more than small signals. You will see it in a shift of energy, a willingness to communicate clearly, a readiness to acknowledge the pattern without blaming you for the pain it caused. Real growth does not tiptoe around the truth. Real growth is humble enough to say, I see what I did. I understand what it cost you. I am willing to show up differently. But these small signals often arrive before that level of courage exists. They are the safer first attempt, and you are allowed to treat them as information, not destiny. Information that tells you whether they want comfort or change. Information that shows whether they can respect your boundaries or try to soften them. Information that reveals whether they are ready to grow or simply afraid to lose access. This is also where you must protect your nervous system, because your nervous system has a memory. It remembers the weeks where you carried the emotional load alone. It remembers the whiplash of closeness and withdrawal. It remembers how quickly warmth could disappear after you offered forgiveness. If a small message triggers anxiety more than peace, that's not weakness. That's your inner wisdom reminding you of what inconsistency costs. And here's the truth that will set you free. You don't owe a full emotional reopening just because someone sends a small signal. You don't owe immediate trust just because someone is suddenly polite. You don't owe your heart to a moment when what you need is a pattern, because your love is not a subscription they can pause and restart whenever they feel lonely. Your heart is not a home they can enter without learning how to protect it. If you respond with the version of you that has standards now. The version of you that's learned to watch behavior over time. The version of you that no longer measures love by temporary intensity. The version of you that understands that real intimacy is consistent, not occasional. And if you don't respond, that can also be love. Love for yourself, love for your healing, love for the future you refuse to sabotage by returning too quickly. Because the most heart-touching part of this whole stage isn't that they might test your availability. It's that you finally know how to protect it. You finally understand that your peace is not something you barter for someone else's comfort. You finally understand that the relationship must be carried by two people, not one person's endurance. You finally understand that your boundaries are not cruelty. They are clarity. So let those small signals show you the truth. If they want real connection, they will meet your standards with consistent action. If they only want access, they will fade when they realize the old version of you is no longer waiting. And either way, you win. Because this time, you are not the one pulling yourself apart to keep love alive. Your real power is not making them feel the loss. It's refusing to carry love alone again. And this is the truth that changes your life, when everything in you still wants a softer ending. Because if you've been with an avoidant who pulls away, you already know how this story usually goes. They retreat when closeness feels real. You reach when distance feels unbearable. They go quiet. You try to repair. They vanish emotionally. You become the emotional engine that keeps the connection breathing. And without realizing it, you start believing this is what love is supposed to feel like. Like effort proving worth. Like patience replacing partnership. Like hope becoming your full-time job. So when you finally stop carrying it alone, it can feel terrifying. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. You stopped trying to earn consistency from someone who only offered it in short bursts. You stopped making your own needs smaller, so the relationship could feel less threatening to their fear. You stopped begging for clarity in a connection that depended on your confusion to stay comfortable. That is not a small move. That is a rebirth. Because the hardest part about not carrying love alone is that it forces you to sit with the discomfort you used to escape through fixing. You used to fix because it gave you purpose, because it gave you hope, because it made you feel like if you worked hard enough, they would finally choose you in a way that felt real and safe. Fixing became the way you protected the bond, but fixing also became the way you protected yourself from the deeper fear of acceptance. The fear that maybe love was never supposed to be this heavy. When you stop carrying love alone, you remove the cushion that made their avoidance feel consequence-free. You stop translating silence into excuses. You stop turning inconsistency into, they're just stressed. You stop making emotional withdrawals feel normal just because you were strong enough to survive them. And because you stopped doing that, the relationship has to reveal its truth. Can it stand on mutual effort? Or was it only standing on your endurance? This is where many people get confused. They think power means making the avoidant miss you, making them regret, making them chase. And yes, your absence may create discomfort in them. Your boundaries may trigger reflection. But that is not the center of your healing. The center of your healing is not their reaction. It's your decision. Your decision to no longer be the only adult in the emotional room. Your decision to no longer confuse loyalty with self-erasure. Your decision to stop proving your worth through suffering. Your decision to stop romanticizing a dynamic that asks you to give more and accept less. Because your love is not supposed to feel like a solo project. And let's be honest about what you carried. You carried the check-ins. You carried the repair talks. You carried the patience that stretched past its limits. You carried the emotional risk while they carried emotional escape. You carried the relationship like a fragile glass bowl, terrified that if you loosened your grip for even a second, everything would shatter. And maybe it did shatter. But what if that wasn't failure? What if that was freedom? When you refuse to carry love alone again, you finally give your nervous system permission to rest. You stop waking up with anxiety disguised as hope. You stop trying to decode moods. You stop treating a basic level of effort like a miracle. You stop begging for consistency like it's a luxury instead of a baseline. That's when your standards become real. Not harsh, not cold, just real. You start noticing how safe love should feel. You start recognizing that a healthy partner doesn't leave you guessing about your place in their life. A healthy partner doesn't disappear because vulnerability shows up. A healthy partner doesn't benefit from your confusion and call it needing space. A healthy partner can handle intimacy without turning your needs into threats. And this is where you must hold your ground, because the old pattern will try to tempt you back with small crumbs. A message, a nostalgic check-in, a sudden softness that feels like everything you once prayed for, and you will feel your heart rise. That's normal. That's human. But this is where your power has to be bigger than your longing. Power is not rushing back into the role that exhausted you. Power is letting new behavior prove itself over time. Power is asking, even quietly, is this a real shift or is this a moment of fear? Because someone can miss you and still not be ready to love you safely. Someone can feel lonely and still repeat the pattern the moment closeness becomes real again. Someone can want access to your warmth without being willing to become consistent enough to protect your heart. So your refusal to carry love alone again is not punishment. It is wisdom. It is you saying, I will not be your emotional safety net while my own heart stays unsafe. It is you saying, I will not reopen myself to a cycle that requires my self-abandonment to function. It is you saying, I deserve a love that meets me with presence, not just panic. And if they truly evolve, your boundaries won't scare them away. They will respect the pace. They will honor the standards. They will understand that trust is rebuilt in calm seasons, not rushed in emotional crisis. But even if they don't evolve, your choice is still sacred, because the real win isn't that they finally feel your absence. The real win is that you finally stop feeling absent from your own life. You get your energy back, your sleep back, your confidence back, your identity back. You remember who you were before love became a constant repair job. You remember that your heart was meant for partnership, not endless emotional labor. And that realization will change the way you love forever. Because once you refuse to carry love alone again, you stop seeing peace as boring. You start seeing peace as proof. Proof that you're healing. Proof that you're choosing yourself. Proof that the next love you allow into your life will have to be safe enough to honor the whole you.